At what are capitalist ethics. And in the last session, we looked at what capitalism was and what it involves. So basically, we came to a few provisional propositions or statements about capitalism and the first thing we learned was capitalism is a system which is geared towards accumulation for the sake of accumulation. So the purpose of the capitalist system is to accumulate more and more. And the rationale behind it is to overcome scarcity and the purpose is to fulfill desires. The fulfillment of desires is the rationale for the whole system, provides the rationale for the whole system. So fulfilling desires is something worthy in itself, something good in itself. And if people are unable to satisfy their desires, so that's something which is bad, which is something bad, something which needs to be overcome. And fulfillment of desires involves expanding people's choices or choice. So they can desire more, and desires can be diversified. And those desires can be fulfilled. And the key concept in this regard is freedom. My ability to fulfill my desires. So desires have no limit, and we are dedicated to overcoming limits that there are on our desires. There's no intrinsic limit on desires. The only non-contingent limit is that we should accept the right of every person to have the same right. And the concept or the value which expresses this, and which is the central value of capitalism, is freedom. in capitalist society is committed to freedom. It produces individuality, which is committed to freedom as well as constituted by freedom. And creates a society which is based on freedom. That's called civil society. And the state whose main purpose is to defend and safeguard freedoms, and the system dedicated to freedom. So the key value of capitalism is freedom. In that sense, capitalism or capitalist society is a free society. That's why it is called free society. And that's what it means. Okay. And this dedication to freedom this freedom means self-determination. Autonomy. That's the key capitalist value. The basic capitalist value, which captures capitalism dedication to the fulfillment of desires, its worship of choice, and its dedication to overcoming scarcity. These are all captured by the concept of freedom, which means self-determination. That every individual can determine their own self as they choose, and nobody else has the right to determine myself, and everybody else has a similar right. That's what self-determination or autonomy means. Self-determination. And self-determination is every individual's right to do what she pleases as long as this does not interfere with the similar right of other members of the society. Right of, as long as this doesn't interfere with the right of other members of society to do as they please. So that's self-determination. It is also known as autonomy. And that's what freedom means. So that means that everybody's choice is intrinsically good and worthy of fulfillment as long as it doesn't interfere with the right of other members of society to have the same privilege or the same right. In that sense, capitalism doesn't recognize so capitalism doesn't recognize any criteria for evaluating the worth of personal choices. Every person's choice is equally worthy of fulfillment as long as it doesn't conflict with the similar choice of other members of the society. And there's no criteria, no non-contingent criteria for evaluating or ordering choices. So you can aggregate choices, but you can't order them. Okay, and there's no criteria for ordering choices. So, for example, one person can dedicate their life to running a charity. The other person's choice is to run a pub. And only unworthy act is if you try to restrict the freedom of one of them. In theory, anyway. And the only reason the capitalist society is there is because to run a charity you need resources. To run a pub you need resources. And restriction on resources limit your choice to run a pub and limit your choice to run a charity. And capitalist society is the one which is dedicated to overcoming this limitation for both of you. And in principle, it doesn't say whether running a pub is better than charity or the otherwise. So in that sense, capitalist only non-contingent values of capitalism are freedom, that's the intrinsic value, because that's what makes you human being. And the other intrinsic value, but which is instrumental in that sense, intrinsic but instrumental value, is overcoming scarcity, overcoming limits on choice as such. So these are two main central values. And capitalist society is a society dedicated to this task of overcoming limit on choice as such, and in order to do that, overcoming scarcity. And it says that in order to do that, you need to create a society which is dedicated to accumulation for the sake of accumulation, and that's the way to overcome scarcity. And capitalist society is dedicated to overcoming scarcity or limits on choice or limits of resources, because without that you can't fulfill your freedom. And a person's freedom, fulfillment of person's freedom, the way to do is to increase, overcome limits on resources, so people have goods to and serve access to goods and services, so that they can fulfill their freedom, and they can fulfill their choices. So in a capital society, a person's freedom is ultimately depends on or limited by the size of their wealth and income. And by the relative value of their physical and financial assets. That's a capitalist society. Now, what type of individuality will prosper in such a society, and what type of values will prosper in such a society will determine the nature of capitalist ethics. So the type of values and individuality which will prosper in such a society will determine capitalist ethics. So in the next session, inshallah, we'll look at what happens when you dedicate yourself to freedom, dedicate yourself to expanding choices, dedicate yourselves to the belief that self-fulfillment is fulfilling your desires, and dedicate yourself to overcoming limits on your resources, so you can fulfill yours. If a society and members of society or a society dedicate themselves to this purpose, irrespective of what their ends are, whether they want to make a pub, run a pub, or charity, what type of values will prosper in such a society, or what type of values are required to run such a society, that will determine what capitalist ethics are, and we'll look at this next time.